So today, obviously, we're talking about colour, and hopefully, we're going to expose a couple of turning points in colour in architecture, things that have sparked new developments and changing in trends. And I'd maybe like to start off with going right back to the origins, because, of course, the colour of old buildings was never actually really a design issue, was it? Maybe I can ask this of you, Barry. We all know that cities like Siena and the colour that's now named after the city. I mean, it wasn't designed, was it? It's just a natural byproduct of where the city was, the colour.
Yeah, well, and I think going back further than that, a lot of people probably don't realize that the pediments of the Greek temples were in fact fairly vividly colored. And everybody assumes that that was that pristine white architecture, but in fact color goes back in architecture, goes back to the early origins of buildings, and then I think that that's sometimes lost in the modernist movement, that color goes way back and was always important in the built environment.
Looking at the buildings in the UK, I mean, a lot of the building in the Victorian era, I mean, is kind of typified by red brick and tile roofs from the clay that's around the cities, and those buildings from a non-architect, I mean, just kind of look right. I mean, that's obviously. Is that just because we're used to seeing those, or are maybe, Sophie, are there some rights and wrongs about colour in buildings and other?
No, I think there's no rights and wrong. I think that's where we are now.
I think that when you look at a brick building, I don't think you see color, you see material. And I think that's really a huge difference, because you don't react to a material the same way as you do to a added color on the surface.
To pick up on your point about the origins of colour going way back, I mean, that was probably, I mean, you were talking about kind of palaces, and but the conventional houses probably, the majority buildings were just kind of indigenous materials, where they like slates in Wales, and when they, I mean, that it was only the kind of higher budget buildings maybe that they could use these. Would that be?
I'd assume that would be the case, but actually when you think about it, if you travel around Italy, you see, and maybe, I'm not sure what the demographics were for having a villa, but you see lots of tile floors that are very vivid, mosaic floors associated with a villa. So at some point you do realize that in a domestic application that they would have had a very vivid floor, which is kind of interesting. I'm not sure what the walls would have been, but yeah.
But it is true. If you look way back, when people started to paint the house, that was because they could afford to.
Yeah.
That's where it started.
Yeah.
I guess in the same way that people used brighter colours in paintings because those materials and paints were available to them.
So you said earlier on that there were no rights and wrongs. I mean, but it isn't what Barry touched on earlier about it being subjective. Like, I might not like red. I mean, how do you deal with that? That you might produce a building that some people just don't like. I mean, you might put off some, residents from buying a building because they don't like the green. I mean, is that how do you deal with that?
Well, actually, I did a colour piece on the interior of a city we have in Nottingham, and it was a gradation of colours that sat above the top of classrooms, but you read it as a gradation that went all the way down one side and up the other side in a straight line. And it was interesting that some children were like, well, that's got makeup above it, I don't want to go in that classroom. So, it's a difficult line to tread.
I think you also have to be aware of that if you live in a building that has color on the outside, you don't see it. I mean, you're inside looking out. So it's when you walk home or leave that you can't see it. Would you really say, I don't want to live here because this building is green and I see it 2 minutes a day? I mean, if it's your personal residential living, yes, I would not paint it in a color I don't like. But in a bigger building, I don't think you would.
Well, I hope not, because interestingly, in kind of East London, there's an outbreak of housing that is in very around the Olympic site. There's that area, I guess Tottenham. There's a number of new schemes coming up that are have very bold use of colors, and it's kind of funny because some you look at and go, oh, I kind of like that, and others you look at and I'm not sure I would say I would live there, but I would say it wouldn't be the first place I would choose the jet.
So Per, you said earlier that there was an increase in the sale of pigments. What, can you derive any trends from that? Are there certain colours that are more?
Well, the trend that you can derive is that people are using more color inside and outside of their houses, and architects are specifying more color. It is not a huge increase at all, but it is clearly on sales. I mean, we sell, you buy the base and you get it tinted so we can measure how much pigment you sold, and it is rising.
So Barry, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the design process. We questioned earlier about who came up with the concept for Central St Giles. You know, what was it? Was it Renzo? Was it the client? So I mean, when you're sort of walking through your office and you're seeing these schemes, I mean, do you say, well, you know, what about adding some colour to this? I mean, or how?
Only if you're desperate. Well, clearly, I think it varies by designers, and part of, you know, we're a big firm, and part of the reason I sit on this involved in this discussion right now is they said, okay, they've asked for somebody who's interested in color. Oh, you're not afraid of color, whereas we have some guys who are clearly absolutely afraid of color. But I think that it varies by the project. A lot of my stuff is mixed use, and I think, you know, when you were talking about public versus private buildings and sort of commercial corporate architecture versus commercial architecture like retail architecture, there, you know, the use of color is a lot more considered. And one of the, I think probably an interesting process to describe is we're working on Gatwick Airport, and it's just a mess. And so we said, okay, first of all, you want to clean it up, you want to knock everything back, and the wayfinding is now a black and yellow color scheme, because that's the internationally most easy to read color scheme. So you've got all these signs that are black and yellow. Well, that's probably not the most friendly color unless you're a goth to start painting things. And so the color has been established. And then you say, well, what kind of works with that? And you get out your color wheel and you start saying, okay, red. Well, now what's interesting there is if you use red, EasyJet objects because it's that favorite orange thing again. So you eliminate all these colors because they're on brand for certain airline users, but not on brand for other airline users. And at the end of the day, that's in a way a personification of any conversation you would have about color amongst individuals, or amongst companies or amongst buildings. And so you end up defaulting to sort of muted tones, natural tones, or neutrals, because nobody can argue with those. When you started out wanting to actually use colors just to create an environment that could exist, that could make a statement, not in opposition to, but equally strong to this wayfinding stuff that is paramount to the airport.
And looking forward, there are a number of kind of lighting technologies coming with illuminated facades that are actually providing the opportunity to have changing colours. But I mean, again, is this something we want, or is this?
Well, does it matter if you want it or not? I think the important thing is that it is happening, and I think what is interesting to look at, I think, is that it's not reflected light anymore. So it's not light shining on a building, it's a building emitting light. You know, it's light, you know, embedded inside, shining out. And what you can do with that, because reflecting light is one thing, but if you have lights inside, and you can do almost anything. And I think that it's like with everything else. When something is new, you want to use it. So you get an invention of some kind, so you can have color light shining out of a building. Great, let's do that. And you will see that for a while, and then we'll say, okay, enough of this.
Yeah. It's interesting because we interviewed Philip Tilley, the chairman of ARAB, when he came in, and I asked him for one word that would most affect architects in the next 10 years, and he said facades, and that was it. And it's interesting that is perceived as, you know, it's an evolving technology, isn't it? There's so many new developments coming in.
I thought you were going to say LED because, you know, the actual light fixtures are changing the quality of lights in a room, and that the big LED screens. it started out in jest, but now I'm trying to get somebody to allow us to do it. I think the ultimate high street store is just a giant video screen, an edge-to-edge TV like the one I had at home, that I just change the facade with every season, and I don't actually mess around with window displays. I just have the fashion show from the, going on constantly, and at the end of the day, that's an arguably a timeless building because it's constantly moving with the times. It's a first-class gadget, but it has yet to be done in that kind of level of purity, if you will. And somebody will do it, and like you said, it'll be, well, that's cool, and then like your reaction to the Salvador time.
But there also, so we have all these movements and stuff, and then you go to Athens, and you look at so out of my hand, it is called the
Parthenon?
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry.
Parthenon, and you like it because it's still.
Yeah.
It's stable, still serenity. There's no movement or lights. Well, there is lights in the evening, but and you really appreciate that. So.
Okay, well, thank you. I think Barry's just given us a glimpse of the future there. We've covered some interesting territory. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.